So, hi everyone. This is my lightning talk, very short. Uh, Basically, the talk is about slider libraries and sliders overall on the websites. And the reason why I'm giving this talk is because I see that in really many cases, people are still using sliders overall on the website where maybe it's not really useful. And second thing, like where they use sliders and where they are useful, like they include these bloated libraries, which I don't have 10, 20, 30 kilobytes of JavaScript and 10, 20, 30 kilobytes of CSS, and basically I feel like this is one of these things that kind of came quite far uh, in the browser, that we could achieve quite many things with quite few lines of code. And I just want to kind of bring it up. Many of you probably know many of these techniques and the ways, but I just want to encourage you to go and use them because, yeah, I'll show you why. So who am I? I'm Ermin, and this is basically my description on the website. It's web-based, Vienna-based web developer focused on transforming problems and ideas into digital solutions, which means just I make websites. So like as simple as that. So as I said, there are two reasons why we should avoid sliders and slider libraries. So one is so this is I'm trying to tackle both of the topics because in some cases we just don't need the sliders, and where we need sliders. Yeah. So basically, first thing is where we don't need sliders. Why do we don't need sliders? Is like sliders are useful if they contain the content people are going to look for. So like, for example, if it's a categories on the e-commerce website and someone sees like 7 categories and they expect that some category they didn't see in these first ones is like somewhere where they can swipe. But where it's not useful, for example, is like if we want to run some promotions and we have a slider on the top of the page, and a lot of people do this. And basically, like, there is on second or third or fourth slide some information, and sadly, like, because I work a lot in e-commerce, sadly we see that these slides are not really seen. Like if you put something important on second or third slide, there's like, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 or 3% people who are going to see it. So it's very useless, and I think it's very important to think about this. Second thing is basically mobile device compatibility, and this is, I'm sure that all of you had experience that you open a website and there's a slider, and then you try to slide and it doesn't work, and you go to the previous page and then to the next page, and like basically it doesn't do what you want. And this is solved by, or like it's solved, like at the moment there are ways that we can just use, or there was for a long time, there are ways how to do it in the browsers, but now there are even nicer ways. So I'm going to show how to do this. Third, like slow page load times. This is what I mentioned at the beginning. Like if we load a lot of JavaScript and CSS to just load the slider, and then basically this has to initiate, especially if it's in the top of the page, it can take some time, and then like we'll get a message from Google and say, oh no, it takes a lot of time to, or there's content shift or things like this. So dilution of the message basically is the pretty much, I will also spoke about this, is basically like if we spread the message across multiple slides, there's a really good chance that the visitors will just see part of it and not the whole thing. And yeah, sliders can be annoying. This is like, we all know this, like once when you're using them, like sometimes you try to slide and you click on it, and then like they often do what we don't want them to do. So what should you do as a developer? Like, first thing, you should go and talk to your designer and tell them, hey, please, let's find another way to solve this, if it's anyhow possible. And I know that this sometimes sounds like, oh, my design doesn't listen to me. But in my experience, as I'm working in an agency and I work with many designers externally, in 80% or 90% of the cases, we would find some way to actually solve this other way. So like, just try it. And the second is like, yeah, considering alternatives, like trying to figure out, okay, what did the client, what was the intention, and then just go with this. So I browsed a little bit around the web to figure out, okay, who is doing it good now, who's not doing it good, and I'm going to show the good examples by recreating them. So I've seen that, for example, Apple, like .com completely switched to not using any slider libraries, but just like scrolling content, like overflow content, and also IKEA. So I figured as IKEA is built in Svelte, I can just try to recreate some things that IKEA did, but in very, very few lines of code, just to show you that you don't have to include 20 kilobytes of JavaScript. You can just write 30, 40 lines of code and have majority of functionality you probably need. So, oh, great. Close line. Yes, I'm sure there's going to be. So actually, my presentation is run also in Svelte, which is great or not great. I don't know. Let's see. Here we go. So I made a website. It's called Svelte. And basically it's, yeah, I literally went today and figured out, okay, I'll copy a few things from IKEA and make it try to look similar. And so what we have here is kind of typical e-commerce website. And for example, they have this content, and this is actually the content. It's so funny because I went and it's like, welcome to IKEA Austria, see it, style it, breeze it. And I was like, huh, I'll just leave this one, you know? So it's like, fine, you know? And so like basically, usually e-commerce websites have some kind of banners where it's like, ah, yes, let's promote this part, that part, let's promote the family, the business, whatever. And then, you know, of course, you don't want to show this also. We need to find ways how to present it differently for in case someone reaches that 9th or 10th box. So first one, the most obvious one, and I think that's really easy to implement, is see more. So basically we show the first few items and then we just show the see more button. I think this is very efficient because if someone is interested in more, we didn't load any JavaScript. We just literally have 3 items and they're loaded instantly. And if someone wants to see more, they will just click see more and more of the items will be loaded. And we can, of course, continue with this. And this is a practice that actually a lot of companies are using, but often I see that a lot of are not, and they're like just chugging everything into the slider, and then, or especially like when there's just one more item, they chug it in the slider. So basically, just for a little more of value, the website gets quite slower. So the next step we can do if we want to use the slider is we can just make overflow scroll. And what we get with this, so I'm going to show the code. So basically this, we can scroll it through. So we get this slider functionality or scroller. I just named it scroller. And we can use this scroll bar. And on mobile, this is going to work perfectly as well. And the reason to it is because this is just regular HTML and CSS without any JavaScript. So like this thing here is running 0 JavaScript, and we have it looking quite nice. And so especially for the mobile apps, or like when you have sliders on mobile, I think this is quite useful. Maybe you can load the more robust solutions on the desktop, but you can go with this on the mobile. I think most of us know already how to implement this, but I can just show the code scroller. So there is literally just overflow scroll over the parent of the cards, and maybe someone doesn't know, but the handle for the scroll that we see can be styled. So basically, you can change the styles of it. You can make something else. You can make it blue or whatever and make it bigger. So like you can fit it to your brand. What I mean by this is like you maybe don't have to implement slider to get this as some pseudo element or whatever. You can just use the platform. I'm gonna return this. So the next step to this is, of course, how about where the next and previous arrows were like bells and whistles. And I have next step that's called slider. So basically it looks the same, but we have now the arrow that will, when we click it, it basically takes things next level, and it hides when there are no more items, and you can go back and forward. It's quite nicer example, and we're already here like, I don't know, 80% or 90% to actually how people use these large libraries. And this was done with just a few lines of code as well, where basically, so we are done, literally this is 30 lines of code, and this is the whole functionality. So we added the buttons, like next and previous, and these can be, and it's often that actually when you import the third-party libraries, you have to style these by yourself anyway. So why not just using simple slide next and previous? The way it's done is, at the moment, what I do is literally just say move the scroll 80% to the right, so you still see some that was seen before, but 80% of the content you will see will be new. And of course, this logic can be modified easily to fit whatever needs you have. Maybe like you want to measure how large is the one of the cards, and then just move by this one card. But like this is easily changeable. But what I meant is, we didn't have to include the whole library. We could just use, because it starts from here, 8 to 28, literally 20 lines of code, and we already got the functionality. And what's cool as well is that as these are just the links, and this is just a regular scroll, it's accessible as well. So basically, this works out of box. We don't have to implement anything. Yeah. Yeah. One more thing is like, but what if I want to click and drag it? This is, I mean, on mobile, this comes out of box. Like this is how browsers work. If the element is overflown and needs to be scrolled, you can drag it. But you can also include 600 bytes library from Svelte that's called drag scroll, that you literally just import and then use. So basically use drag scroll, and this gives you the functionality that you can also drag it in the browser. So yeah, now we're getting back to the, yes. So last thing that someone might need is scroll snap. So this is also very well known by a lot of developers who are following the latest trends, but it's not so new. It came out 2 years ago, but I see it very seldomly. So what is the scroll snap? So sometimes we need an option to kind of fit the certain slides in certain places on the screen. So we don't want to just to freely scroll left, right, but we're in luck because basically now browsers widely support a feature called scroll snap, which basically allows you to see, like, if I try to scroll it a little, it will just force me to show the whole box. So if I go far enough, it will show me the next one. So like it will always try to snap it back. And this works also very beautifully with the arrows. So we get the functionality basically of the whole slider and the difference between this and the previous one is just 2 lines of code where we need to, I can show it, and these 2 lines of CSS where we needed to, on the slider, so on the parent, say that the scroll snap type is X, so like on the X axis, and it's mandatory, so it's gonna, and you can look there are many things there, like scroll paddings, like how much, so basically this helps how much should it like force it back or not. And the other thing is on the item itself, we need to tell where should it align. So like scroll snap align, we can say center, but the same way we could have told start or the end. So basically like to show, should this be centered or should it be on the left, and just see the beginning of the next one or other way around. And you can of course change this also just simply with media queries, which is also like 2 or 3 lines of code can change completely the functionality of the slider. So this is what I wanted to show, and why I wanted to show it is because big brands are already using it. There is no need to include big libraries. Just go with plain CSS and 20 lines of JavaScript, and you can get probably as far as you need to get. Yeah. So last thing is, what are the limitations of this? Like one of the big ones is, for example, as this is just overflow and div, like when we come to the end, we cannot infinitely scroll like in the sliders. So if you need that, like some people do, literally when you click on the last arrow, it just scrolls you all the way back to the front. It's not the prettiest thing, but it works. Some people do workarounds where they just jump you to the first one, so you don't see this animation, which is also not nice. But yeah, this is basically one of the few downsides.
I mean, you could theoretically rearrange the DOM elements and take the first one.
But then it moves the slider if you take the first one. But then again, you're expanding, putting more JavaScript, but that's not the point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's basically what I wanted to show on this beautiful Svelte website. Does anyone have any questions?
So you said that you might not need the slider library. Can you talk a little bit about from your own experience when you need it?
Yeah, so where slider libraries come handy is when you, for example, first, like when you have different breakpoints and you have to have different behaviors on different breakpoints, you know, basically in this case, you have to implement everything yourself. In the slider libraries, you can say, okay, you know, on resolution smaller than this, I just want 2 slides. And of course, you can do it here as well, but then you also need to adjust a little bit of JavaScript, you know, and then you can say, for example, what's missing here and what we don't see here is we don't see the pagination. You know, there's no like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or these dots, you know. So like this is something, if you need it, you gotta implement it yourself. So like basically it keeps adding up. So this is one of the things. But like for most of the cases, I'm not using like I use like all of like first like all carousel and then Flickity and then there's so many. Like I tried all of them and they're great. You know, you can do a lot of things, but they're bloated. So like it's often, especially when you're resizing the screen or adding new items to the slider, they get really, so like I personally do not use libraries so often any longer. Yeah, because I feel that the technology in the browser came so far that sometimes clients want some specific things. For example, I know many libraries have integrated have integrations with the other libraries. So for example, you can say, aha, I want image gallery slider, and when I click on the image, so it opens it in basically kind of this light box, you know, and then inside that I also want to scroll through the images, you know, and this is, you can implement this manually, but it takes a lot of time. And then maybe if the time is in the pinch and you know, the client doesn't have a budget, you know, you would just include 2 libraries, which is horrible, of course, performance-wise. But yeah, they're like, yeah, we really have to have this on our blog that, you know, we will have 100 bottles of event and we don't want it through the slider, we want it to interact like we want 2 libraries. But that's pretty much it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
The breadcrumbs you showed today in the introduction, it uses the virtual scrolling.
Yeah.
The library, very heavy, and it was a pain gesture on it. So I know what
yeah, that's another thing. Like this cannot, it's not virtual scrolling. So like if you have a lot of items, it's not good. But none of the slider libraries are also behaving well with a lot of items. So this is not a change. This is no difference. Yeah. Yeah, also like slider libraries also have implemented, okay, you can see how many cards do you want to move per click. You know, I can say I want to move 2 cards or 1 card or all cards, or, you know, so like there are a lot of options that most of the people don't use. You know, if you go to the any slider library options, just like documentation and just the options, there are like 60, 70, 80 things to fill in. And when you ship or when they ship this library, basically everyone gets this. Everyone gets all of this code. Yeah. So yeah. Any other questions? You're welcome. Yeah. So that's all. I hope that someone learned something or is at least more encouraged to just use the browser techniques.